Welcome to this deep dive. I'm your host, and I'm joined, as always, by a resident expert. And today's mission is to unpack a massive £125 billion structural crisis.
Which is just an unfathomable amount of money.
It really is. We're talking about the fundamentally failing transition from the education system into the workforce for nearly 1 million young people. But listen, we aren't just here to admire the problem and depress you.
No, nobody wants to just sit around and talk about how bad things are.
Right. More importantly, we are going to explore the antidote. We're going to look at how mastering personal finance, building true financial resilience, and diversifying your income streams is no longer just good advice from some slick wealth guru on the internet.
Yeah, it's not just a nice to have anymore.
It really isn't. It is becoming a vital, non-negotiable survival mechanism for you, for your kids, and honestly, for the entire next generation.
Exactly. Because the traditional pipeline, the one almost everyone listening to this probably relied on, where you go to school, you get a foundational entry-level job, and you just slowly climb the corporate ladder.
The old reliable path.
Right. But that pipeline is severely fractured now. In some places, it's completely shattered.
So to understand how we got here, we are synthesizing two incredibly revealing sources for our deep dive today. First, we have a massive, highly detailed 2026 UK government interim report. It's simply titled Young People and Work.
And it is exhaustive. It is a heavily researched diagnostic look into exactly why this generation is stalling out.
And alongside that, we are bringing in insights from moneymastery.pro, which is this really fantastic independent financial education platform. They focus a lot on behavioral money habits and building financial agency.
And honestly, it's the intersection of these two specific sources that is so revealing to me.
Yeah,
because we have the macro-level systemic failure detailed by the government data paired with the micro-level behavioral solutions offered by those financial educators.
It's the perfect pairing to actually make sense of this. Now, before we really unpack this, we are going to be diving deep into that government report. And just a quick heads up to you listening, this report pulls absolutely no punches.
It really doesn't. It is incredibly blunt.
Very blunt. It contains some highly critical assessments of major state institutions. We're talking from the national education system to the National Health Service, right down to the welfare state.
And it critiques policies from both past and present governments, too.
Right. So just so we're entirely clear up front, our job today isn't to take a political stance or point fingers at anyone. We aren't endorsing these viewpoints as our own personal politics.
We're definitely not.
We are just here as your guides, objectively breaking down the raw data, the facts, and the lived experiences contained in this source material. That way, you can make up your own mind about this massive national debate.
Our goal is pure clarity, not commentary. We just want to give you the tools to understand the architecture of this crisis.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Let's actually step into the streets of this imaginary dormant city we talked about and figure out how an entire generation is being left on hold. Let's start with the sheer scale of the numbers, because they're hard to wrap your head around.
They really are. The term the government report uses, and you'll hear this a lot in policy circles if you read this kind of stuff, is NEET. N-E-T.
Right.
It stands for not in education, employment, or training. And as of the end of 2025, there were 957,000 young people in the UK classified as NEET.
Almost a million.
Almost a million. That is near the 1 million individual lives. That is 1 in 8 young people in the country.
1 in 8. I have to be honest, my very first thought when I read that statistic was, okay, well, the economy has had a rough few years. We've had crazy inflation, post-pandemic adjustments, supply chain issues. Surely it'll bounce back, right?
That's the natural assumption, yeah.
Because traditionally, we usually treat youth unemployment like a bad weather system. You know what I mean? We just wait for the economy to improve, the clouds part, businesses start hiring again, and the storm passes.
Right, you just write it out.
Exactly. But reading the actual data in this report, it argues that this isn't weather at all. This is more like climate change.
That is a brilliant way to put it.
It's a permanent structural shift in the environment. So are we basically trying to solve a 2026 problem using, 1998 logic?
We absolutely are. And that's the danger here. If this were just an economic weather system, we would see the NEET rate drop significantly when the broader economy is booming.
Which makes sense.
But it hasn't. The UK NEET rate has barely crept below 10% in 25 years.
Wait, 25 years, so a quarter of a century.
A quarter of a century. The only time it ever dipped below 10% was a brief highly artificial moment during the pandemic furlough era when the state was essentially, paying companies to keep people on the payroll.
Oh, right, because no one was actually working, but they weren't technically unemployed.
Exactly. Aside from that one anomaly, it has been a chronic baseline failure for 25 years. And to put that in an international context, by 2025, the UK had tumbled so far down the European league tables that only Romania had a higher youth NEET rate.
Wow, only Romania.
Yeah.
That is a staggering reality check for a G7 economy. I mean, we pride ourselves on being this global financial hub, but here's where it gets really interesting to me, and frankly, a bit terrifying. The nature of this group has completely changed.
Oh, fundamentally.
Because when I was growing up, if you were out of work, you were unemployed. Meaning you were actively looking for a job. You were printing out your CV, you were checking the job boards, doing interviews, getting rejected, and trying again.
Right, you were hustling.
Yeah, you're in the game. But the report says this crisis is no longer just about unemployment. It has shifted to something called economic inactivity. Can you explain the difference for us?
Yeah, and this is the defining shift of the whole crisis, really.
Sure.
Unemployment means you are actively seeking work, and you are available to start tomorrow.
Okay.
Economic inactivity means you are not working and you are not looking for work. You have detached from the labor market entirely.
You've basically taken yourself off the board.
Exactly. Today, nearly 60% of these NEET young people are economically inactive.
60%?
Yes. And shockingly, 6 in 10 young people who are NEET today have never had a job. Ever.
Wait.
Never. Not a paper route, not a Saturday shift at a cafe, nothing. That is up from 4 in 10 back in 2005.
Never had a job. So they are reaching their mid-20s, like 24, 25 years old, having never experienced a payday, a workplace routine, a commute, or even just having to answer to a boss.
Precisely. They've never had to set an alarm for a shift. And the cost of this detachment is just astronomical, both on a macro scale and a micro scale.
Tell me about the macro cost first.
Well, the report estimates the cumulative annual cost to the country is 125 billion pounds.
That is... I can't even visualize that much money.
To put it in perspective, that is more than the entire country spends on the public education system each year.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. And on a personal level, for a 24-year-old who has never worked, the long-term scarring effect is immense.
Because they're starting so far behind.
Right. Even if they eventually re-enter the labor market later on, statistically, they will lose up to 300,000 pounds in earnings over their lifetime compared to their peers who started working earlier.
Think about that for a second. If you are listening to this right now, maybe you don't have kids or your kids are doing fine, they're in college or working, you might think this doesn't really affect you.
Sure, it feels like someone else's problem.
But think about how that 125 billion pound drain impacts your local economy. It impacts the income taxes you pay, the public services you rely on, the NHS wait times, and the structural integrity of the workforce your own business or your employer needs to survive.
It drags everything down.
It's not just their problem. It's a massive societal anchor weighing everything down.
It really is. And what's fascinating, well, deeply concerning really, is that the system doesn't even know where a huge portion of these young people physically are.
What do you mean?
There is a phenomenon the report investigates called the hidden cohort. In England alone, there are around 314,000 18 to 24-year-olds who are completely off the grid.
Completely off the rails.
They aren't in school, they aren't working, and they aren't claiming any state benefits.
Wait, stop there. I have to interrupt. How do you just lose over 300,000 people? I mean, don't they have national insurance numbers? Doesn't the tax office or the NHS know they exist? I just don't understand how someone becomes invisible in 2026. We leave a digital footprint every time we buy a coffee.
You would think so, given how connected everything seems to be. But it comes down to how the state architecture is legally designed.
Okay, explain that.
Up to the age of 18, local authorities, so the city or county councils, they have a statutory legal duty to track a young person's participation in education or training. They keep databases, they follow up.
Right, the truancy officers and all that.
Exactly. But the absolute second that young person turns 18, that legal duty evaporates, just gone.
Just like a switch flips at midnight on their birthday.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Unless that 18-year-old proactively walks into a job center, the UK's government employment agency, and makes a formal claim for unemployment benefits, they become invisible to the state apparatus. They just fall off a bureaucratic cliff.
So the tax office knows they aren't paying taxes, but it's not their job to check on them.
Right.
And the education system knows they left, But they are aged out, so it's not their problem either. So literally no single institution is responsible for tracking them, checking on their welfare, or guiding them back into society.
Exactly. They just vanish into their bedrooms. I mean, they might be supported by their parents, they might be doing casual cash-in-hand work, or they might be completely isolated. But officially, on paper, they are ghosts.
Wow. Okay. If they're falling off a cliff at 18, we really need to look at who built the cliff.
Fair point.
So we've got this system churning out teenagers who feel completely unprepared for the real world. How does that happen? Let's talk about the schools, because surely 14 years of mandatory education is supposed to prevent exactly this.
You would certainly hope so. But the report is very clear that the education system, despite the massive, heroic efforts of many hardworking teachers, is structurally failing to provide a foundation for the working world.
Why? What's the structural flaw?
The primary reason comes down to incentives. Schools and colleges in the UK are recognized, regulated, and rewarded almost entirely on academic exam attainment.
The grades.
Just the grades. They are judged on how many kids pass their GCSEs, which, if you're listening from outside the UK, are the standard exams taken at age 16, and their A-levels, the exams taken at 18. And they are judged by their Ofsted ratings, which is the government school inspection agency.
Right, so it's all about the test scores.
Exactly. They are not measured on destinations, meaning there is no real accountability for what actually happens to that student 6 months or a year after they walk out the school gates for the last time.
So if the school system is a factory, it seems perfectly optimized for producing a product exam results that the outside market no longer values as the sole metric of success. Meanwhile, it completely ignores actual survival skills.
Yes, and the crazy thing is having those qualifications isn't even the protective shield it used to be.
It used to guarantee a job.
It did. But the report notes that nearly 30% of these NEET young people actually have good GCSEs. Over 21% have a level 3 qualification, like A-levels, and 15% of them have university degrees.
Wait, 15% of the NEETs are graduates?
Yes. They are still completely stranded.
Which tells us loud and clear that passing an academic test is not the same thing as being prepared for reality.
Not at all. In fact, 67% of the NEET young people surveyed in this report said the current curriculum completely fails to prepare them for work.
2/3 of them feel failed by the curriculum.
Yep. They feel they lack the practical soft skills, workplace communication, professional etiquette, and crucially, basic financial understanding.
And this is exactly where the insights from moneymastery.pro come in, and it's such a vital connection to make here. They point out that 70% of adults have poor financial habits that we feel trapped by, simply because it is never taught in schools.
Which is so true. Most of us had to learn by making mistakes.
Exactly. We are churning out young adults who might be able to solve a complex quadratic equation or, quote Shakespeare, but they have absolutely no concept of what moneymastery.pro calls the basic minimum amount.
Right, the baseline survival math of adult life.
Yes. Like, how much does rent actually cost in a city? What is council tax? How does interest on a credit card compound and bury you in debt?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the education system is producing academic qualifications, but completely failing to produce resilient adults. They enter this highly complex, unforgiving economy without understanding concepts like opportunity cost or their own psychological money scripts.
Okay, unpack money scripts really quickly for the listener.
So money scripts are the underlying, often subconscious beliefs about money that they inherited from their environment. Like if you grew up hearing money is the root of all evil or rich people are greedy, that becomes your script. And the schools do nothing to address or rewrite those scripts.
The human cost of this structural blindness is just heartbreaking. There's a quote in the government report from a 16-year-old girl in Belfast that really stopped me in my tracks when I was reading it.
Oh, I know the one you mean.
Yeah. She didn't get the GCSE grades she needed. She felt she couldn't get into her local technical college because of it. And she said she was never told what her alternative options were. Her exact words to the researchers were, so I kind of just stayed in the house, and I was like, right, well, this is just the end.
It's devastating.
At 16 years old, she thought her life was effectively over because she failed a standardized test, and no one sat down to show her a different path.
That quote is the absolute definition of a systemic failure. The system prepared one narrow, highly academic pathway. When she stumbled on that path, the support just vanished.
It's like, sorry, you didn't fit the mold. Good luck.
Exactly. What she needed in that moment wasn't a lecture on the importance of studying harder for exams. She needed someone to look at her actual interests, her strengths, and guide her toward an apprenticeship or a vocational route.
But those routes are so hidden.
They really are. The UK has among the lowest levels of work experience for students in the entire OECD. Meaningful work experience is treated as an administrative afterthought, and professional careers guidance is incredibly patchy depending on what postcode you live in.
And it starts way earlier than 16, right? I was reading the section on early years development, and the report points out that this pipeline of disadvantage actually starts when they are toddlers.
Yes, the longitudinal data is unambiguous on this. Becoming neat doesn't suddenly happen on your 16th birthday. It starts at age 4.
Age 4, that's preschool.
Yes. Children who are not deemed school-ready at ages 4 to 5, meaning they lack basic personal, social, and communication development when they enter primary school, are nearly 3 times as likely to end up neat at 16.
Wait, what does school-ready actually mean in this context? Are we talking about knowing the alphabet or being able to count to 10?
No, it's more about basic developmental milestones. Can they follow a simple instruction? Can they interact with other children without extreme distress? Can they communicate a need, like telling a teacher they need the bathroom?
Oh, wow. So it's behavioral foundation.
Exactly. The tragedy is that the system sees this deficit immediately. It records the data. As the child grows, it tracks their persistent absence, their special educational needs, their low attainment. It watches them fall further and further behind year after year, but it doesn't have the architecture or the funding to intervene meaningfully and change the trajectory.
It's like watching a train slowly derail over 12 years and just standing on the platform taking meticulous notes on the crash.
That's a grim metaphor, but it's very accurate.
So the supply side, the schools preparing the youth, is fractured. But let's play devil's advocate for a second, because I know people listening might be thinking this. Even if the schools drop the ball, surely a motivated 18-year-old can just walk down to the high street, get an entry-level job in a pub or a retail shop, and figure it out on the fly, right?
That is the assumption a lot of people make, yes.
Because that's what we did. I remember my first job, it was awful. I was terrible at it, but I learned how to show up on time and deal with customers. Why can't they just do that?
We really have to challenge the narrative that young people today are just lazy or part of some soft generation. The report explicitly states that the evidence does not support that caricature at all.
So they do want to work.
The vast majority want to work. But the labor market itself has radically changed since you and I got our first jobs. The bottom rungs of the career ladder haven't just been raised. They've been systematically kicked away.
Let's talk about the death of the Saturday job, because I think this is so crucial to understanding the disconnect. Getting a part-time job at a local shop or washing dishes at a cafe used to be a rite of passage.
Right. It was everyone's introduction to the economy.
And it wasn't about building a permanent, high-flying career. It was about low-stakes exposure to the working world. You learned to deal with a grumpy customer, you learned how to take instructions from a manager who wasn't your parent or your teacher, and you learned how to manage a small paycheck.
Exactly. That ecosystem is vanishing rapidly. Just look at the numbers. In 2006, 35% of 16 to 17-year-olds worked a part-time job. Today, it is just 19%.
It's halved.
Almost halved. The traditional entry-level landscape has basically evaporated. Take high street retail, which was traditionally the biggest absorber of young, inexperienced labor. High street retail lost 8,000 physical outlets between 2019 and 2025 as online shopping grew from 5% to 26% of all retail sales.
So physical jobs just aren't there anymore.
Right. And the roles that do remain in hospitality or retail are much more intense now. Retailers are operating on razor-thin margins. They prefer to give more hours to experienced older staff rather than take a risk on a teenager who needs basic training and, frankly, pastoral care.
And the recruitment process itself has become an absolute nightmare. I've heard stories from younger listeners that just blow my mind. It's like the corporate world removed the stairs, installed a sheer rock wall for entry-level jobs, and expects an 18-year-old with social anxiety and zero experience to just free climb it.
That is exactly what it looks like on the ground. Think about how you got your first job. A generation ago, you could walk into a shop, hand a paper CV to a manager, make eye contact, have a quick chat, and they might take a punt on you based on your attitude.
Yeah, they'd say, "Can you start Tuesday?"
Exactly. Today, a young person applying for a basic warehouse packing role or a retail assistant job faces automated portals, algorithmic CV screening, psychometric tests, and recorded one-way video interviews.
Wait, explain the recorded one-way interviews, because that sounds terrifying.
Oh, it's awful. You speak into a webcam with a timer ticking down on the screen, answering pre-recorded questions. You don't get to see a human reaction. You do all this before you ever speak to a human being.
Just imagine being 18. You're already dealing with the standard social anxiety of being a teenager. Maybe you don't have great internet access, or you don't have a quiet room in your house because you share a bedroom with your siblings. And you have to perform for an AI algorithm just to get a minimum wage job stacking shelves.
It's incredibly alienating. The young people interviewed in the report talk about sending out hundreds of applications, literally keeping massive spreadsheets to track them, and just getting automated rejections months later. Or worse, total silence.
Ghosted by algorithms.
Yeah. This creates what the report identifies as a devastating catch-22. Employers are demanding experience and work readiness from day one. But the flexible, low-stakes avenues to actually get that experience have been eradicated.
But what about apprenticeships? Aren't they literally designed for this exact scenario, earning while you learn?
In theory, yes. Apprenticeships are supposed to be the bridge between school and work. But the reality is that apprenticeships have drifted far, far away from young people. Over the last decade, apprenticeship starts for the youth have declined by over 40%.
Why? If we need them so badly, I feel like politicians talk about apprenticeships constantly.
They do, but the funding structure was changed. And corporate HR departments figured out how to game the system.
How so?
Well, the funding is increasingly captured by employers using the apprenticeship levy to upskill their existing older workers.
Wait, what?
Yes. So instead of a 16-year-old getting an apprenticeship to learn plumbing or business administration, a 40-year-old middle manager is getting a state-subsidized MBA that is creatively labeled as a management apprenticeship.
Are you kidding me?
I wish I was. The latter is quite literally pulled up.
That is infuriating. So the education system pushes them out unprepared, and the labor market built an algorithmic fortress to keep them out, and even the apprenticeships are being swallowed up by middle managers.
That's the reality.
So where do they physically go? If they aren't at work and they aren't at school, they end up in the waiting room of the NHS or the benefits office.
Which brings us to the most alarming part of this entire diagnosis, honestly. Health and welfare. It is arguably the most critical bottleneck we are facing. Ill health, and specifically mental health, is now the primary driver of who becomes NEET and who stays NEET.
It's a huge shift.
It's massive. The proportion of disabled NEETs citing mental health as their primary condition has almost doubled in recent years to over 40%.
So almost half.
Yes. We are talking about severe anxiety, depression, and neurodevelopmental conditions. These are no longer peripheral issues. They are the defining features of this crisis.
And how does the National Health Service respond to this influx? Because the report says the NHS is fundamentally configured for clinical treatment, not participation.
Right.
Like it treats the symptom, but it doesn't ask if the treatment plan actually leads that young person back to school or work. Look at the fit note process. I couldn't believe this statistic when I read it. Doctors issue roughly 11 million fit notes a year.
It's a staggering volume.
And 94% of them are just checked as not fit.
Yes. The fit note system operates on a binary logic that is actively harmful to young people with fluctuating mental health conditions.
Break that down. What does that look like in a doctor's office?
Picture a GP who is incredibly pressed for time, usually operating on a strict 10-minute appointment slot, and they see an anxious, overwhelmed 19-year-old. The easiest, most compassionate-seeming thing to do in that 10 minutes is to check a box that says not fit for work.
Just to give them a break.
Exactly. But there is no nuanced plan for workplace adjustments. There's no occupational therapy, no pathway to gradual participation. For a teenager who's never had a job, a not fit note doesn't hit a pause on a career. It stops a career from ever starting. It formally medically certifies their incapacity.
Okay, so the doctor certifies them as incapable, and then the welfare system takes that certificate and monetizes it in the most perverse way possible. Break this down for me, because this is where the system completely breaks logic. Let's look at the financial trap of universal credit, the UK's main welfare benefit.
Okay, let's look at a single claimant under the age of 25. The welfare system essentially has two main tracks here. If you are deemed fit for work, you are placed in what is called the intensive work search regime.
Which sounds intense.
It is. You are expected to search for work up to 35 hours a week, treat it like a full-time job. You have to attend regular mandatory job center appointments, and if you miss an appointment or fail to apply for enough jobs, you face heavy conditionality and potential 100% sanctions on your money.
Meaning they can just stop your payments completely?
Completely. And for all that stress and effort, navigating the AI portals and everything, you receive £316.98 a month.
Okay, £316.98 a month, which is barely £10 a day.
barely.
To deal with the sheer rock wall of AI job portals, the constant rejection, and the constant threat of losing your money if your bus is late to the job center, what's the alternative track?
The alternative is the health journey. If you get that not fit note from your GP and go through a state work capability assessment, you might be placed in the LCWRA group, which stands for Limited Capability for Work and Work-Related Activity. In this group, you have absolutely zero work search requirements. No regular job center appointments, no mandated CV writing, no hassle from work coaches, and your payment jumps from £316 to £740.25 a month.
Wait. Let me get this straight. If a young person with severe anxiety wants to try, say, a 10-hour-a-week part-time job just to gently build their confidence and get out of the house, the system actually makes it financially riskier for them.
Yes.
They have to fight through the intense work search regime for 300 quid. But if they just stay in their bedroom, accept total inactivity, and surrender to their diagnosis, they get 740 quid and zero pressure from the state. That's not a safety net. That's a spider web.
That is the exact perverse incentive the report highlights in stark terms. The system turns a complex human struggle into a binary financial choice. Taking a pathway to inactivity offers, and this is in the report's own words, higher income, less hassle, and lower risk.
I mean, you can't blame them for taking that deal.
You really can't. Young people with fluctuating conditions are terrified of losing that secure £740 income if they try to work, fail because their anxiety flares up, and then have to reapply and go to the back of the queue.
The risk is too high.
Way too high. The welfare system is supposed to be a springboard, but it is functioning as a trap. It literally pays for incapacity rather than investing in capability. And the long-term results of this trap are catastrophic.
What does the data say on the long term?
Of those who first claim a health and disability benefit between the ages of 16 and 24, almost half are still entirely out of work 15 years later.
Wow. So it's a life sentence, effectively.
In many cases, yes.
Look, we've spent the last hour painting a pretty grim, deeply frustrating picture, but we promised an antidote at the beginning of this episode. Because if you are listening to this, whether you are a young person entering this meat grinder, a parent worrying about your kids, or just an adult trying to navigate a volatile economy, the message is crystal clear.
The traditional pipeline is broken.
It's broken, and you absolutely cannot wait for the state to fix it.
Exactly. The report calls for a whole system reset, arguing we need to move from a passive welfare state to an active working state. But let's be realistic. Macro-level policy takes years, often decades, to implement.
Yeah, the government moves at a glacial pace.
Right. The individual listening to this cannot afford to wait for a white paper to become law. This is where the synthesis with moneymastery.pro becomes so crucial. Total reliance on income from traditional entry-level employment is now a massive vulnerability.
It is. The report actually highlights a glimmer of hope that perfectly illustrates this mindset shift. Amidst all the doom and gloom, the author visited communities and met young people who were finding their own way around the rock wall.
Oh, the young woman in Wrexham.
Yes. There was a young woman in Wrexham who completely bypassed the traditional labor market. She didn't bother sending out 500 CVs to AI portals. Instead, she taught herself to build a Shopify site and started running a very successful custom nails business right out of her bedroom.
She exercised pure financial agency.
She did. She looked at a system that was structurally designed to reject her, and she built her own microeconomy. She didn't ask for a seat at the table. She built her own table. And this is exactly what moneymastery.pro advocates. You have to build financial resilience outside of the traditional corporate and state structures.
Let's apply those money mastery principles directly to this systemic failure. The first one is pay yourself first.
Okay, let's talk about that. Usually people hear this and think it just means putting 10% of your paycheck into a savings account before you pay your bills.
Which is standard advice, yeah.
But let's be real here. If I am an 18-year-old surviving on £316 a month from Universal Credit, paying myself first sounds like a bad joke. I literally don't have enough to eat or heat my room. How does Money Mastery actually suggest a vulnerable young person does this?
It's a fantastic question because the traditional advice falls completely flat when you're impoverished. When capital is scarce, paying yourself first has to pivot to your other available resource.
Oh, jizz.
Time and energy.
Ah.
If you are unemployed, your full-time job shouldn't just be feeding the AI job portals. Paying yourself first means taking the first 2 hours of your day when your mental energy is highest and investing it in yourself, not a prospective employer.
So learning something new.
Exactly. It means using free resources to learn a digital skill, like basic coding, graphic design, or e-commerce, like the girl in Wrexham. You are micro-saving your energy to build a skill buffer, so you aren't entirely at the mercy of a rigid welfare check or a minimum wage gatekeeper.
That makes so much sense. It's an investment of focus, which ties perfectly into the second principle, opportunity cost. We saw how young people are spending hours every single day filling out spreadsheets and sending unanswered applications into the void just to meet their job center quotas.
Right.
What is the opportunity cost of that time? What if instead of banging their heads against a closed corporate door for 35 hours a week, they did the bare minimum to satisfy the system and spent the rest of those hours building a side hustle or creating an independent income stream?
It's a total reframing of how we value our own time. And that leads to the deepest principle of all. Changing the money script.
We mentioned this earlier, yeah?
Money mastery emphasizes that we have to peel back our behavioral habits and outdated beliefs. For generations, the script was, money is the reward you get for giving 40 hours of your week to a corporate employer.
That was the deal.
But if the corporate employer won't hire you without experience, and you can't get experience without being hired, you have to rip up the script.
You have to start viewing money not as a wage granted by an authority figure who deemed you worthy of hiring, but as a tool for financial agency.
Absolutely.
It is about understanding the systemic complexity that is often manufactured to confuse you and choosing to step outside of it. It's about not letting a broken school system that only values exams or a binary welfare system that pays you to be sick dictate your worth or your earning potential.
Exactly. To summarize the architecture of what we've unpacked today,
Yeah.
the UK is staring down a generational fault line. We have nearly 1 million young people stranded in inactivity.
It's staggering.
The education system is producing exam results, but not resilient, financially literate adults. The labor market has removed the entry-level stepping stones and replaced them with algorithms. And the health and welfare systems are actively trapping young people in inactivity because it is financially riskier for them to try to work.
It is a massive wake-up call. We have to decouple our financial security from these broken traditional employment structures. Whether you are 18 or 48, you must act as your own money mentor.
You really have to.
Financial education is no longer just about optimizing your tax returns or picking a good index fund. It is about structural realignment. You have to take control of your financial literacy to avoid the compound loss that this report outlines.
It truly forces us to ask what the future of work actually looks like if the old pathways, the old ladders, are never coming back.
And that leaves me with a final provocative thought for you to ponder long after you finish listening to our deep dive today. We started by visualizing this dormant city of youth, completely locked out of the traditional economy.
The ghost city.
Right. But what if this massive systemic breakdown actually forces a kind of financial renaissance?
Oh, that's interesting.
If the traditional working state has utterly failed to transport this generation into standard employment, what if the next generation, out of pure, unfiltered necessity, becomes the most financially literate, entrepreneurial, and independent workforce we've ever seen?
It would be something.
What if by aggressively pulling up the corporate ladders, the system accidentally created a generation that learned how to fly on their own? Something to think about. Until next time.